Well, that was a blast. That was my first electric vehicle test drive, and thanks to the guys at EVCO, Plug and Drive, Enviro Center, and of course IKEA Canada, where it was parked out front of. Couldn't ask for much more as far as my first time behind the wheel of an electric vehicle, and certainly hope to get behind a whole bunch more. And I know if the guys at the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa have anything to do with it, I definitely will. It's exciting to work alongside with them. I want to thank them so much for coming along and doing the whole EV area. If you haven't had a chance to go check out the EV area, definitely do so after this presentation. Pretty neat over there. They're talking about some pretty cool things, charging, Mythbusters, what available cars are out there. So definitely check them out. I think we all know that we need to get into electric vehicles sooner rather than later. It's definitely something that's coming. We're starting to see EV only zones potentially across Canada. Montreal is thinking about one by 2025. We're seeing ones potentially in Ottawa by 2028 if the Energy Evolution guys have anything to do with it. So, electric vehicles aren't going anywhere. We see our friend Elon, who's doing quite well. And, we see companies like GM and Ford really jumping on the electric vehicle bandwagon. So our next presentation is all about electric vehicles. We've got Raymond, Leury, and Mike Banks from the EVCO to chat and talk about electric vehicles. Mike Banks has a degree in public affairs and policy management and currently works as a trade data analyst at StatsCan. Michael has owned an electric vehicle since 2017, which he uses as his daily commuter vehicle, and is in the process of retrofitting his house with clean technologies with a goal of making it net zero by 2030. Well done, Mike. Mike is active in helping people transition to zero-emission vehicles, having already converted most of his friends and family to those. Raymond Leury is retired from an information technology career, consulting for over 25 years to both private and public sector clients throughout Canada. He has always been interested in environmental issues. He has attended Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, and which reignited his passion, in particular the reduction of greenhouse gases. That led him to purchase an electric vehicle 7 years ago and to get involved in EV owners groups, where he now occupies the position of president of the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa. So without further ado, I want to bring in Mike and Ray for their presentation. Thank them so much. And hey, let's talk about electric vehicles.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks very much for having us. So we'll get going. So today what we're going to do is we're going to demystify EVs. So we hope that after this session, you'll see that EVs are actually better than ICE vehicles. So ICE stands for internal combustion engine vehicles, so diesel or gas. So just an overview of what we're doing today. So we're talking about demystifying EVs right now. We had a session about electric buses at 11:30. For the rest of the day, we'll be doing charging at home at 1:30, and then 2:30 we'll talk about what's available in Canada. You'll see there are a lot of vehicles available right now in Canada, and many more coming soon. Then at 3:30 we'll do the other part of the myth busting. We'll talk more about the environmental aspects and those areas of EVs. So right now what we want to do is we want to explain why EVs are better than ICE vehicles. Later on we'll talk about the other things that are a bit less, some of the disinformation that we're seeing about EVs. So you're welcome to attend that. If you have those same questions after this, if we have time, we'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have. After that, at 4 to 5, we'll be in the transportation breakout room in the networking area. So you'll have another opportunity to ask questions. So the agenda for us right now is we will talk about the EV myth and why EVs are better than internal combustion engine vehicles. And before we do that, though, we'll talk a bit more about EVCO just briefly. So EVCO has been around since 1982. We're 100% volunteer nonprofit. So you're probably wondering, what were people doing with electric vehicles in 1982? Well, at that time, they were doing mostly conversions from gas engines to electric engines. So it's been a long journey since then, almost 40 years now. What we're doing more today is that last part. They're promoting electrification of transportation systems and mainly to reduce greenhouse gases. We don't do conversions very much anymore because there are vehicles in market that are less expensive to acquire than doing a conversion. So We have no affiliation or funding from industry. So just to be very clear, we are not selling product, and we do not get any funding of any type from any players in the industry. We do this on a volunteer basis because of the climate implications is a big thing, but also being EV drivers, we know that EVs are so much better. So and they're exciting to drive. So hopefully we'll convince you of that as we go along. So we've developed a large amount of subject matter expertise on all forms of EVs, from passenger vehicles up to heavy duty trucks. So but today we'll concentrate on EVs. One of the things we did over the last couple of years is we ran what we refer to as our e-bus campaign, electric bus campaign. And the objective of that was to influence council to get them to have OC Transpo transition to electric buses. So diesel buses are produce lots of greenhouse gases, and they're also expensive to run. So we ran a campaign, and up to now where we are, which I'm very pleased to say, is we have a commitment from OC Transpo to start buying electric buses. We're looking for council to commit to not buying diesel starting next year. So still working on that. If you would like to talk to your councilors about that, we'd be happy to have you help us with that. But bottom line, 4 electric buses will be on the roads of Ottawa this fall. So that's a good progress. We'd like to see more, obviously, but it's good progress. So we'll go into the myths on why EVs are better than internal combustion, and I'll pass it over for the first myth to Mike.
Yeah, thanks. So the first myth that we come across a lot is that people say there's not enough choice. I know all about gas cars, but I don't know anything about EVs. What can I buy? So we put together a buyer's guide at EVCO. I've put it together. It's a spreadsheet that basically is a list of all the EVs that are available for sale right now in Canada. Well, in Ontario specifically, but in Canada in general. There are 22 full EV models, and then within each model, there's a few submodels. So there's actually more than just 22. And there are dozens being introduced every year, if not every month. Some of them are plug-in hybrids, like the Chrysler Pacifica. That's one of the ones that I own. And that's built in Canada. There's also new plug-in hybrids coming to market, and those act more or less as an EV when the weather's nice and you're within the range. And a lot of them have a range where, like in our case, we don't exceed the electric range of our Pacifica on a daily basis at all. So we go months without having to buy gas or even using any gas. So PHEVs are a very good option as well for a lot of categories that aren't quite covered with EVs. There are 10 models in stock in Ottawa at dealers. I called around while I was compiling the list of the buyer's guide, and that's available at evco.ca/buyer's guide, by the way. You can just go to our website, evco.ca, to check it out. But there are EVs in stock at a dealer. So if you wanted to get one, and you want to make the switch right now, you can go to a dealer and buy an EV. Tesla has a bunch in stock as well. But if not, if there's something you want, like a special color, or you want special features, then their order book is typically 2 to 9 weeks for a lot of models. So you can get one within a few weeks. And one of the big categories that's very popular, of course, are pickup trucks. And while there are no pickup trucks currently available to drive around yet, they are coming this year. Tesla's coming out with one. Chevy, Rivian, they are all coming out with electric pickup trucks. Atlas Motors is coming out. So there are a bunch of options that are imminently coming to market, Tesla and Rivian being the main 2 this year. Ford's working on an electric F-150 as well. So if people are waiting for a pickup, hang on a little bit longer, keep your old pickup going for another year, and you'll be able to change it out. Next slide, please.
So I'll cover the cost of EVs. So there's a myth that EVs are too expensive, and that's probably because of Tesla and the original cars that were fairly expensive. There's also some other Porsche models and all that are fairly expensive. That being said, if you look at that list that Mike referred to, you'll see that there's a number of other cars that are much less expensive. So the list that we have is the lowest price vehicle available right now is a Volkswagen e-Golf, and it starts at $38,000. It's eligible for a federal rebate of $5,000. If you're in Quebec, you're lucky. You get another $8,000 rebate on that vehicle. The vehicles are really not, we're not talking about $100,000 vehicles here. We're talking about vehicles that are below the average price of a new vehicle sold in Canada. There's also a number of used options under $10,000. If you look at autotrader.ca, you'll see tons of vehicles out there that are available for lower prices if you're looking for a used vehicle. The TCO, so total cost of ownership, is or can be much less than a internal combustion engine, and that's where things become interesting. So if you look at your total cost of ownership over a period of time, with many of ththese vehicles, you would save significant amounts of money. The 2 Degrees Institute has got one comparison they did a little while back. And what they say there is a reduction of 71% of fuel and maintenance costs. Well, electricity, even in Ontario, costs 75 to 80% less than the equivalent gas. And that's particularly true if you've got time of use pricing and you're charging off peak, where the electricity prices are much lower. So what they're saying, what the 2 Degrees Institute, which is based in BC, what they're saying is that over 10 years, you could save, if you're driving 15,000 kilometers per year, which is a fairly low number. I know I drive 30,000 on average per year. You could save $23,000 to $36,000 in mostly fuel, but maintenance is also less expensive. If you look at one of my vehicles, so I've got a 2013 EV with 266,000 kilometers on it, and it still has the original brakes. So brakes last much longer on EVs, so you save a lot of money. Also, there's no oil changes and no mufflers to change, and a whole bunch of other parts that are a part of gas vehicles that just simply don't exist on electric vehicles.
And it's worth pointing out that if you drive more than 15,000 kilometers per year, the savings are more, right? Because you're not using the gas and stuff. Yep. So
the more you drive, and if you have a fleet vehicle, the more it becomes economical to drive electric. So other comparisons that are out there, or other numbers are out there. So this one is from cleantechnia.com, and this one is a bit old, but numbers have changed a bit. But essentially, it shows you that a Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus, which people think that Teslas are expensive cars, but if you compare it to a Camry, which is sort of the average car in Canada, more or less, the total cost of ownership is less for Tesla Model 3 than it is for a Camry. Right. Again, this one we're assuming 15,000 miles, not kilometers per year. You see the estimates there. So bottom line is, driving electric is not that expensive, even if you're looking at vehicles that are higher quality vehicles like the Model 3. So other comparisons. This one was done by Corporate Knights, which is a Canadian organization that's quite interesting, looking to reduce carbon emissions in all sorts of areas of the Canadian economy. So they've done a study that looks at the cost of ownership over 10 years, 200,000 kilometers, so 20,000 kilometers per year. They compared the Kia Niro, the electric Niro, with the Nissan Qashqai, and assuming 2.9% financing over 72 months, you see the Niro is a bit less expensive. Okay. And if you look at the other comparison, it's a Model 3 SR Plus compared with a Class C Mercedes-Benz, and it's considerably less expensive. And actually, if you take into account the difference in interest rate there, it's another $7,000 or so different. So if you were to get the same interest rate, 1.9, it would cost you about $20,000 less over 10 years to own a Model 3 SR Plus. Okay, so these vehicles are not expensive. What's driving the price right now? is battery cost. So when I bought my original 2013 EV, the cost of the battery was probably about half the price of the vehicle. Okay, so and what we're seeing is the price of batteries is going down dramatically. So what we've seen is we had predictions of 80% reduction over 10 years from 2010 to 2020. And the reality was a 90% reduction. And economists are telling us that the price will continue going down as we move forward. So, like I said, my car, 50% of the cost in 2013 was a battery. Today, it would be about somewhere around 20% of the cost of the vehicle would be the battery. Okay. And if you look at the powertrain cost comparison, this is an official fossil fuel powered car. Okay, so an efficient, this would be a small car like a Chevy, not a Chevy, a Honda Civic or something of the sort. This is the cost of the powertrain. It goes up over time with inflation and all that, and regulatory requirements. What we're seeing is a tendency in a different direction with electric powertrains. So we're expecting that within a few years, the cost, initial purchase price of the electric car will be at par or less than a gas car. So they'll become even more affordable and even cheaper to operate over time. Okay. So back to Mike for the third myth.
Yeah, so one of the myths that's less so now with the viral videos of Teslas and stuff, but EVs are glorified golf carts. That sort of implies that they're slow and that they trudge along. And I'm sure everyone can sort of relate to the image of the Prius. Right when the Prius came out, it was sort of a frumpy little car that didn't drive very fast, but it was green. So we let it. It was okay because it was green, but they weren't exactly known for their performance specs, and they would never compete with anything like a muscle car or anything like that. But that's not the case anymore, right? All electric vehicles are actually very quick and fast, and there's a difference there. Quick means that they accelerate really quickly, and fast means that they can go very fast, to 200 kilometers an hour kind of thing. And that's because electric cars have all of their torque at 0 RPM. So unlike a muscle car, like there in the list, you can see there's Dodge Challengers, there's a Bugatti Veyron, which has 1,000 horsepower. It's a supercar. All of the combustion cars, their torque is on a curve, and it sort of peaks at a few thousand RPM, like 2,000, 3,000, even a bit higher in some cases, depends on how the engine is designed. Whereas an electric car, all of that torque is available right off the bat, right at 0 RPM. Which means that you can accelerate from a dead stop very quickly, much faster than any piston car could ever dream of doing. And we got some numbers here. So we've got the 0 to 60 miles per hour, which is roughly equivalent to 102 kilometers per hour for those of you that don't do imperial like me. So 0 to 102 kilometers per hour. So that's highway speed from a dead stop at a stoplight. The Tesla Model Y, which is an SUV, can do it in 5.3 seconds. Chevy Bolt is a respectable 6.5. And the Nissan Leaf, which is what I drive, is 8.4. And those, they don't sound that great. I mean, they're not the eye-watering Bugatti Veyron 2.5 second speeds there. But for consumer cars, if you were to compare them with gas versions of like a RAV4, for example, those are up in the 8 to 10 seconds range, right? So you really feel a kick in the pants when you drive any electric car versus a piston car equivalent. And so on the list on the right of the screen, what you see is the Model S Plaid, which is brand new, just came out. It'll be available in April. Those can do 0 to 102 kilometers per hour in under 2 seconds. That's motorcycle speeds. And that's compared with the Porsche Spyder, which is 2.1 seconds, which is a supercar. And I believe that one's actually a hybrid as well. Then there's, Lamborghinis, Dodge Demons, right? These are known for their acceleration. And the Model S pure electric can beat all of them, which is quite remarkable. And that's even true for a if you're doing the stoplight drag race kind of thing. If you have a plain, Model 3 Standard Range Plus, we have some members in EVCO that have a couple of those, a couple of members that have those, I should say. And every day they, put people's Camaros and Challengers and Mustangs to shame when people pull up next to them and, pump the throttle a little bit and say, hey, race you to the next light kind of thing. Not that we encourage that. That's not good. Don't do that. But we actually have a member that goes to a drag race. He goes to Luskville, and he routinely just creams the drag race piston cars with his stock standard range plus. Like, he hasn't even modified it. He doesn't have any special tires. He didn't do any upgrades to it. It's just a stock standard range plus. And he posts his videos on YouTube, and he's beating people who have spent tens of thousands of dollars on special tires and engine upgrades and all this stuff on their muscle cars. And he just, wipes the floor with them. So EVs are definitely not golf carts. They are fun. They have a very low center of gravity, so they handle well in turns. A lot of them come in all-wheel drive, so you've got the traction to put the power down. They're just a blast to drive. So we can dispel that myth once and for all here, I think.
Okay, so the next myth is EVs take too long to charge. Well, this is one that I'm certainly familiar with and been talking to people about for a long time. But the reality is, especially if you're charging at home, it really takes only 10 seconds to plug it in, right? And you unplug it in the morning, and every single morning, the car is ready and full, right? So you don't have to stop at the gas station when it's minus 20, raining or sleet or snow, whatever, to fuel your car. It's already ready when you leave home. So it's very, very practical. And it doesn't take very much time when you're at home. Now, the car will charge overnight. So, and the car, most people, when they get home, they plug their car in, and then they'll take it the next morning. So it's really not an issue, right? If you're on the road, we'll talk about that in the next slide. So if you look at home charging, it's quite simple. This is on top here. This is the standard plug that actually works with Teslas also. Tesla has a different connector, but this particular adapter here, the part at the bottom, could connect into the part at the top, and you could use any what we refer to as level 2 or 240 volt charger to charge any car out there. So very, very straightforward. In terms of if you're charging away from home, there's a site called plugshare.com that will show you the chargers. This here represents only the high-speed chargers. So we'll have a session a bit later on about charging. But here, what we're looking at is CSS Combo and Shadamo, which are high-speed charging for non-Tesla vehicles. And these are all the locations in Ontario that are available. If you were to drill down in the map, you would see even more. So there are charging stations all over the place. The situation is getting better all the time. So there's really no reason why you couldn't take these cars on the road. If you look at the Tesla situation, so similar, same app, but with Tesla superchargers. So these are the fastest Tesla chargers. You see where they are. There are some all over the place, and they're deploying more all the time. So charging on the road is not a problem. I've been as far as South Carolina with my car and had no issues at all. There's another website called A Better Route Planner. And this example here is with the Kia Electric Niro. And what I did is I plotted leaving from my house and going to Miami. And here it shows me where I should drive. It shows me where to stop and for how long I need to stop. Okay, so this application is very easy to use. There's a phone version of it. The Teslas and some other vehicles, I'm not sure which all other vehicles. I know that the Bolt, for example, has this. But some vehicles have an app in the car that will do this for you. So finding the chargers is not a problem. You're not aware, if you're not an EV driver, you're probably not aware of how many charging options there are because you're not looking for them. Right, and they're not advertised. So most people who have an EV, they use an app to find the charging stations. They don't use signs on the side of the road. So the networks of chargers don't use roadside advertising to show where the charges are. So it's if you're not looking for them or not using an app, you won't find them. But in reality, there are tons of them available everywhere throughout North America. And Europe and other parts of the world.
Yeah, it's one of those things. They're just street furniture, right? Like you don't notice every mailbox on the road, right? Because they just sort of, you're not thinking about it, so you just don't see them, right? EV chargers are very much the same kind of thing.
So Mike, the next myth?
Yeah, so they don't have enough range, and that's a great segue from Ray's talk right there about long road trips. One of the most common myths and one of the most common anxieties that people have switching to EV from a conventional car is the range, right? People want to drive to Toronto, they want to drive to Montreal. They know that they can do that with their current fossil car, but they don't know if the new Kia e-Niro will do it, or whatever car they happen to be looking at. And that myth has thankfully gone away. That anxiety can now be in the dustbin of history. All the new EVs on the market have a very respectable range. They can all do at least 300 kilometers. Even the Hyundai Ioniq there, I think they've updated it so it can do about 300 kilometers now. So you can comfortably drive to Montreal from Ottawa without having to stop halfway to charge. I mean, you can if you want, but the range is there. You can drive to Kingston, no problem. Even going to as far as Toronto, if you stop in Kingston, which is what I do anyway with the kids, you got to stop after a couple hours. Regardless, they can all make the trips, even with minimal charging stops. So that has gone. The short range EV thing. I mean, I own a 2012 Leaf, and that is a short range EV. That is a city commuter. It's got about 100 kilometers of range. And yes, I definitely have range anxiety, especially if I try and leave the city. But if you're in the market today, they can 1-for-1 replace a gas car, no problem with the range. And if you go to our buyer's guide, as I mentioned earlier, evco.ca/buyer's guide, or just visit our website and it's in the menus, you'll see I put all the ranges on the cars there, and you'll see, you can do pretty much anything with these electric cars nowadays. They don't all have the 1,000-kilometer range that some people want. Not many gas cars can do 1,000 kilometers, I should point out. But even the Tesla Model S Plaid, it has 840 kilometers. I mean, that's not Bad. You can drive to the Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario in one go with that car. And there's more coming. So the range is getting better every year. And we're at parity as far as range is concerned for most gas cars, and soon electric cars will have longer range, longer legs than the fossil equivalents. So that's pretty fantastic. Back to you, Ray.
Okay, so the next myth is EVs don't work in winter. In Canada, it's really cold, right? So actually, what I would tell you is EVs are better than ICE vehicles in winter from a number of perspectives. They always start. Again, actually, we have one of our members who a number of years ago was at his cottage when it was very cold overnight, and he used his electric car to boost 2 gas cars that wouldn't start because it was too cold. So there's never any issue starting an electric car. They always start. So instant heating. So with a nice vehicle, especially if it's very cold, you have to wait for the engine to warm up before you get cabin heat. Right, so it could be several minutes before you get some heating in a nice vehicle. With an electric car, instant heat. So it's either a heat pump or resistive heating that's used to heat the cabin, and that starts immediately when you leave with the car. Also, most cars, if not all cars today, allow you to preheat the car, and you could do that even if the car is in the garage with a closed door. Right, there's no emissions coming out of a tailpipe, so you could preheat the car, no problem. There's even some cars that you could preset them to heat 15 or 20 minutes before you leave every morning, and they'll just do that automatically. You hop in the car, and the car's ready to go. One of Mike's favorite anecdotes is when he got his first Leaf. Yes. Actually, I'll let you tell the anecdote.
I can tell it, yeah. So when we first bought our Leaf in 2017, I bought it used off Auto Trader. And I was just, it was June, and I was just in the car, new car to me, playing with the buttons. And I came across the climate timer. And so I thought, oh, well, that's kind of neat. I'll just set up the climate timer. I know when I go to work, and I know what time I leave every day. So I'll just put that in the car and let the car know that that's what I do. I leave at 8 a.m. every work day. And so I did that, and I didn't think about it after. I just sort of, went about my life. And the first hard frost we had that fall, right? It was, October. By this point, I'd forgotten I'd done anything with the climate timer at that point. And I I was getting out of bed and I could hear people outside with the cars idling, they were scraping. And I thought, oh man, I have to go outside. I'm still in my boxers. Like, I don't want to go outside in this. It's already -10 and people are scraping and everyone's sort of kind of miserable out there. So I put on my coat and my boots and I like go out the door, and my wife's like, where are you going? And I'm like, well, I'm going to go scrape the car. And she's like, oh yeah, good luck with that. And I got out to the car, and all the other cars are covered in ice, but our Leaf was ice free. And I thought, what's going on here? And I could see the little lights on the dash were blinking because the climate timer was on and it was warming up the car for me. And so I come back in the house and she's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I don't have to scrape. And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, I set the climate timer and so the car's warm. And she's like, wait, we don't have to scrape anymore? I was like, apparently not. The climate timer, like the car warms up and you don't have to scrape. And she's like, that's it. We live in the future. We're done. This is the best. Nobody talks about this feature with electric cars. And it was the single biggest thing that we found with our electric car. But that was the biggest benefit, was that every single morning in the winter, my car is warmed up and ready to go. And I don't even have to scrape. I do have to take off the snow if there's 6 inches or whatever that's fallen overnight. But on most days, the snow is all melted and the ice is all gone off the windshield by the time I'm ready to go in the morning.
Yep. So that's quite a benefit. So if you look at the other things about winter, we are used to diesel and gas, but we've I guess forgotten the disadvantages of these technologies. In particular, OC Transpo, their diesel buses don't start well when it's really cold. So when it's really cold, like last night, they run their diesel buses 24 hours a day. So they have them parked outside 24 hours a day if they're not on the roads running, so that they're able to start them for the next day's usage, right? So, and that the colder you get, the more that's a problem with diesel. I know it's a problem with propane too, which is not very common anymore for vehicles. So they're not; those fuels are not particularly good, and we tend to forget about that. The other thing is that you lose some range with gas cars in the winter. With an electric car, you lose about 10 to 20% when you're doing long trips. And when you need range is when you're doing long trips. On short trips, you will lose a lot more than that. And that's what you see in the paper. Unfortunately, people focus on, I'm going to the grocery store, which is a few kilometers away, and I'm losing lots of range, 40, 50%. Well, that's because you're heating the car and you're heating the battery and all that for a very short trip. If you're doing a longer trip, you lose a lot less range, and it's when you're doing a longer trip that you want to have the extra range, right? So Mike, back to you.
Yeah, so batteries will need replacing. I get this a lot. My friends are like, well, yeah, but you have to change the battery after 10 years or whatever. What happens when the battery goes bad? What do you do with your car? And the fact is, you don't have to change the batteries. The batteries are designed to last the life of the vehicle. The Tesla Model S that Ray has, right? He has 267,000 kilometers, and his battery capacity is still 90%, right? That's fantastic. It's almost a decade-old car, and it's still 90%. The Nissan Leaf that I have, that's a special car. That's a special case, so it does not apply to EVs in general, because the Nissan Leaf does not have a managed battery thermally, so they don't do anything to keep the battery warm or to keep the battery cold. So the battery just sort of is left out in the elements, and batteries typically don't like that. But even still, my Nissan Leaf is a 10-year-old car now. It's a 2012. So they bought it in 2011 or whatever. And the battery is still usable, still fine. I don't need to replace the battery. It was a short range car to begin with, so the range is a bit of an issue now that it's lost some of its health. But in the newer generations of cars that have 500 kilometer range, 400 kilometer range, you're not going to miss 10% of the battery capacity after a decade of use, right? These will last the life of the cars. And even when the car is all rusted out and the battery is still there, and you're like, it's time for a new car, it's been 20 years or whatever, the batteries still have life as they have a second life as static storage. And the reason for this is because while they might have lost a bit of capacity over the life of the vehicle after 10, 15 years or whatever, the reason that they're no longer suitable for vehicles is because they can't provide the massive amount of power you need while you're accelerating. But that doesn't mean they don't have power still left in them. It just means that you have to trickle it out at a more gentle rate. And that's where stationary storage comes in. So car makers like Nissan are taking back battery packs from my Leaf. So my Leaf's minimum value is $5,000 because that's what Nissan will give me for the battery alone. They will take those batteries and they will put them into stationary storage applications where they power a building or they power a grid, or they combine a whole bunch of them and make like grid storage, that kind of thing, backup power, so they can act as like a backup generator for a building. And they will last another 10, 20 years in that capacity before they ever need to be thought of for recycling purposes. And so we're just getting into the electric car race now. So people are wondering why batteries aren't being recycled yet. Is because most of the batteries that have ever been produced for electric cars are still in those cars. And even the ones that aren't are now in secondary life. And they will be for the next 10, 20 years. And then they'll be recycled after that because they have valuable metals in them that are very useful to make new batteries.
Okay, so if you're interested in getting or attending our meetings, we meet every last Monday of the month, except for December at 7:30 p.m. So our next meeting is on February 22nd. So you could go to our website for that. But essentially, if at this point we've done the formal part of the presentation, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to entertain any questions you have.
Yeah, and so Nick was going to be in the chat looking at questions in the chat. So he'll be jumping on here in a second to let us know if anybody has any questions that we'll be able to answer them. I know he's a little busy there. And he's back.
Putting his headset.
Yeah, there we go. He's putting on his headset.
Thanks, guys. What a great presentation.
Thanks.
Great to hear all about electric vehicles. I know there was a good bit of chat there. A few people were kind of asking about range and things like that. One question was, how much range do you actually need? What do you guys think on that?
Well, it depends on what you want the car for. A lot of people have it in mind that, I need 500 million kilometers of range in my car because I sometimes want to drive to Winnipeg or whatever. But that's just not the case for most people in their daily life. You might do a long road trip once or twice a year. But most of the time, most people on average drive under 50 kilometers a day for their commutes, right? Some drive more, of course, some drive less. My commute is 25 kilometers. And so for a car like that, I mean, the Leaf does make a lot of sense in that respect, a short range commuter car. But sometimes you do want to drive to Montreal. So an appropriate range for an electric car would be whatever you want it to do. So if you find a car that is good enough for you, then go for it. But most electric cars seem to be aiming at the gas car market. And so they're roughly 500 kilometer range, 400 kilometer range, because that's what gas cars do. And that's what people know and expect. Ray, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I people tend to overestimate how often they do very long distances, and note that it's not impossible. It's certainly quite feasible to do long distances with the shorter range cars. So if you look at the e-Golf in particular, with about 200 kilometers of range, we have one of our directors who's gone to Sept-Îles, Quebec, with that vehicle, and Quebec actually is very well equipped with electric charging stations, so it's quite easy to travel in Quebec. He's also gone to Annapolis, I think it is, in Maryland.
Yeah.
Where he had a boat there, but anyways, long story. But he was able to make it there no problem with his relatively short range car, right? So the thing is, if you're going on a trip once in a while to Montreal or Toronto, there are charging options. It's really not an issue. Yeah. Those applications that I was showing earlier will tell you where those charging options are. And it's a question of getting used to it and taking the bull by the horns. Now, if you have two cars, if you're a two-car family, to me this becomes a no-brainer. If you're concerned about the range on long trips, well, start with one EV and then use the gas car to go on longer trips. Now, that being said,
is that you'll use the EV for long trips.
Exactly. What most people are finding, and that was certainly my case, is that I stopped using the gas vehicle for long trips because it's so much cheaper and so much more fun driving the electric car.
and quieter and more comfortable.
Yep.
And the other thing is that when you switch to an electric car, it's a lot. There's a bit of a mental leap that happens where the thought experiment I like to tell people who are just thinking about getting into EVs is most people already have a gas car of some sort, so they're familiar with that. And so, what would you do if your gas car would get a full tank every single night? Right? Would you care how long you could drive on it for most days? And I think the answer for most people is actually, if I had a full tank every night, I don't think I would even think about how much gas I have in the tank, right? Because people do a lot of driving on a quarter tank of fuel, and my Leaf has a range, even with the small 100-kilometer range, that's about a quarter tank of fuel for a lot of cars, right? So anything more than that, like the e-Golf, for example, a couple 100 kilometers, I mean, that's a half a tank of gas for a lot of people. And I don't think most people have range anxiety in their gas car when they have a half a tank of gas. I think they're fine. And especially if that tank magically replenishes overnight while you sleep. So that's what it's like driving an EV, is that you start the day with a full tank of gas that just is there because you plugged it in. And so there's a bit of a mental leap that happens when you buy an EV, and you readjust your thinking a little bit.
Yeah, I gotta say that would be pretty neat to get someone to fill my tank overnight. Wouldn't mind if I can leave my address if people need. That's not a problem. No, great presentation, guys. I know in the chat people were talking a little bit about used EVs. I'm sure you guys touched on that, but maybe a quick little word on that. What are some things that people should look for if they are out there looking at used EVs?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk to that because I bought one. So they are available. They've been around. EVs have been around for about a decade now for the mass market. So there are plenty of used EVs on the market. They tend to retain their value more than the gas equivalent because there's just so much more demand for EVs now than there are for used gas cars. But the things to keep in mind, it depends on the model you're looking for. I would say for most EVs, it's like buying any other used car, right? You want to make sure it looks, it's in good repair and that kind of thing, hasn't been abused. There are some things for the Leaf that you would pay special attention to when you're looking at used, which is mostly the battery health, because the Leaf specifically has issues with longer term battery. If they abuse the battery, it degrades a bit faster. But for most other EVs on the market, that's not really a concern. So if you are in the market for a Leaf, come give us a shout. We can talk more in depth privately and see what you're looking for. But if you're in the market for a used EV, it's an excellent option. They are much cheaper than buying new, of course, as with used cars in general. And I would highly recommend, if you're looking to get into an EV and you already have a car and you just want to replace it, or you're looking for a second car or whatever, definitely used market is a good option.
Yeah, the other thing to point out there is that the most manufacturers offer 8-year or so warranties on batteries. So even if you're buying a used EV, it's likely to still be on the battery, and sometimes the electric motor are still on warranty.
Yeah, exactly as well.
Fabulous, guys. And I know Sun had a question. Yeah, we're going to be recording the sessions here on the sustainable stage, and we'll be pushing that out on YouTube. One last question we had from Mark. He's wondering, given the evolution of EVs, is it better to lease or buy new?
That's an interesting question. I would say that the most of the technological innovation in EVs has already occurred. So what we're seeing right now is steady incremental improvements in technology. There may be new battery chemistry someday that and there's some promising candidates out there. There may be some new chemistries out there that will give better range and that kind of stuff. But really, that's like having a bigger gas tank, really, in a conventional engine. I certainly wouldn't wait for any innovation coming down the pipe. We've got the innovation we need. I think the big game changer was vehicles that had 300 kilometers or more of range. That I think most people think that's enough for the vast majority of what they need to do. So I certainly wouldn't wait for any innovation.
There's no step changes on the horizon, really. No. I mean, people talk about solid state batteries. We'll see if that comes to fruition. But even then, that'll just give you the same range in a lighter package. but it
At
doesn't
less-
fundamentally change the vehicle. Right?
Yeah, at less cost maybe and all that kind of
At less
stuff, right?
cost.
But we're seeing that with the current chemistries, we're seeing a fairly rapid decrease in costs and all that. So nothing dramatic.
So if there's an EV that sort of fits your use case and fits your budget, go for it. There's no reason to not wait. And I mean, there won't be anything that'll come along in the next year or two and blow it out of the water. Like we saw, decades ago with computers, where as soon as you bought your new computer, there was a better one that came out. That's not the case with EVs.
Yeah, one thing I might say about so Mike mentioned a bit the plug-in hybrids, and that was on the slide because if you're looking for a minivan, the only option available right now is the Pacifica, right? Which is
so that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. There are some vehicle categories that are not quite serviced by EVs, minivans being one, and off-road vehicles being the other.
Yeah.
Chrysler has done a plug-in hybrid for the minivan, so that's your best bet for now.
Yeah.
And
so
ahead.
Sorry. What I was going to say is, if you think about a plug-in hybrid, what you have is a gas engine plus an electric engine plus a battery. So when the plug-in hybrids were originally introduced back in the Chevy Volt days and all that, it made economic sense to have a plug-in hybrid because batteries were so expensive. These days, what we're seeing and what we're forecasting is that the plug-in hybrids will disappear off the market because they're, you get the best and the worst of both worlds with plug-in hybrids.
Yeah.
So because of cost reasons, mostly I expect they will slowly disappear. We've already seen that with the Chevy Volt that was canceled a year or two ago, right?
Yeah, because you're still lugging around a gas engine, so you have all the drawbacks of having a fossil engine, which like oil changes and maintenance problems and timing belts and all that nonsense that doesn't exist with an EV. And so I know for me personally, I mean, we have the Pacifica because it's the only minivan with the plug, but the minute somebody comes out with a pure electric minivan, we will be trading it in for that, for sure.
Awesome, guys. We'll want to thank you again so much for a great presentation. I know you're around for the rest of the day, so I invite everybody to go over to the electric vehicle area and chat a bit more with these guys. You've still got charging coming up shortly. You're going to talk about available cars, which is great. Everybody wants to know what cars they can get into, and then really look forward to that Mythbusters session at 3:30. And then we've got a couple guys from the EVCO who are going to be in the transportation networking room at 1:30. So really invite everybody to head over to that.